Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I am sharing how to make this fun smoothie themed shaker card using a whole bunch of Lawn Fawn stamps as well as some pattern paper for the background. So not my usual ink blending. If you watch a lot of my videos you'll know I love ink blending for backgrounds, but today I'm going a bit out of my comfort zone using some pattern paper and a whole bunch of Lawn Fawn stamped images. So without further ado, let's get into it. Of course, I'm starting this card since there's no ink blending, I'm starting with coloring. So there is going to be a big chunk of coloring in this video because as you could see from the previews, there was a lot of images on this card. And I used a whole whack of different Lawn Fawn stamps for this. To see the full list, go check in the description below the video. In case you didn't know, I always post all the supplies I use down in that description box below the video, so if you're ever wondering what I'm using or which stamps or which dies or anything like that, definitely check out that description box, and of course ask me in the comments if I've missed anything and I'm happy to answer you. So I will say, if you're not into watching coloring and you just want to see how the card comes together, definitely feel free to skip ahead. The rest of this video after the coloring is done will show how the card is assembled. But if you do like watching coloring, then definitely feel free to stick around as well. I'm going to talk you through my coloring technique a little bit, and depending on how far I get, I might let the coloring continue while I play some music, but we'll see how it goes. So as you can see, I'm starting with that blender and now moving on to the orange juice and a few of the other kind of fruity elements of the card. I decided to go with a lot of pastel colors for this. I wanted to keep it very light and bright. So for the blender, I decided to just color it in with very light mint. Of course, the orange juice gets an orange, and I'm adding a little bit of the smoothie to this glass with some orange as well. For the blender itself, I did decide to keep the main glass part of the blender just blank. I colored a little bit around the edges with a light blue, but that's because I know that I'm going to be cutting out that section to be able to showcase through to the back as part of the shaker element of this card. So I wasn't worried about coloring that in since that's going to be cut out anyway. For the rest of the images, I'm just using sort of a basic coloring technique that I use in a lot of my cards, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you know this technique already, I'm sure. So I'll just mention it briefly again. In general, I tend to use 2 colors per image, especially if they're small, so I'll use a dark and a light, and I just kind of go back and forth and blend between them. I start with the dark and then blend it out with the light, and then what I'll often do is I'll go back with the dark one last time and add one last layer of dark. And I find this just really adds a nice layer of dimension. It kind of helps bring back that depth to that dark tone that got lost a little bit in the blending. So I usually do that. Sometimes I add in a 3rd shade, so I'll have a light, a medium, and a dark. And that's sort of just when I feel like I have the right colors, or if I even just want some extra dimension in that image. So that's sort of what I'm doing here. For the blueberries, I used again just 2 shades, a dark purple and a light purple. Actually, I used the blue violet, so the BV shade, to kind of make them more of a bluey purple, as blueberries are. And yeah, just kind of choosing some sort of bright and pastel-y colors for the rest of these images, some nice pinks for the berries, and of course yellows for the bananas and reds for the strawberries. Now that I've talked you through that coloring process, I am going to let some music play while I finish up with the coloring here. So again, definitely feel free to stick around and watch the rest of the images come together as they're colored, and I'll be back to walk you through the rest of the card coming together once the coloring is done. Okay, so now that the coloring is done, it's time to start building out the rest of the card. To start with, I'm starting with this little shaker element, so I'm cutting out the inside of that blender so that you'll be able to see through it to the shaker elements inside. I started that by just making a little cut with an X-Acto knife, and then I finished it off with my scissors by just going around on the inside border of that blender. I cut out off camera a piece of gingham patterned paper from Lawn Fawn, as well as a little strip of Neenah Desert Storm, which is just that light brown, and I just figured that that could be a really nice background, almost like a wallpaper in a kitchen. And I knew that I wanted to leave a strip of white blank at the bottom, and I wanted to stamp on the sentiment, "We blend well together." I chose red ink because I thought that would pair nicely, kind of bring out that red from the strawberries. You'll see later in the card that that part of the card ends up getting totally changed, and I'll explain why later. So to build the shaker element, I'm actually cutting out that spot where the blender will be in both the pattern paper and some fun foam. That fun foam is going to be essential for holding all of those little shaker bits and adding some elevation and dimension to the shaker pouch. So I'm cutting out a little shaker pouch for that blender, again out of the pattern paper and the fun foam, and I'm kind of just lining them up, making sure that they're the right size and that those holes are hidden behind that blender image when I layer it on top. Once I've done that, I can come in just with a light blue marker and add a little bit of color to the card base, and this is what will show through at the back of that shaker. So I wanted the back of the shaker just to be a light blue, so I just colored that right onto the card base, and then once you layer everything together, you can see that light blue right through the shaker. Now it's time to start building out the shaker, and I'm starting by adding my fun foam directly onto that card base, using some double-sided tape. So I'm just cutting little pieces of double-sided tape and releasing the release paper, and then putting that right down onto the card base there. Sorry about my head, I try to line it up and I had to sort of be right on top of it to do that, so you'll see my head poking in from time to time and I do apologize for that. So once the fun foam is stuck down into the card base, I can fill it up as the little shaker pouch. So I took some of the images I colored, a little strawberry, a blueberry, a banana, and a couple little ice cubes. And I wanted them to be in there as if they're kind of shaking around in the blender. I also added a few little seed beads because I figured this would give it some extra glitz and glamour and a little bit of fun. I really love the way that seed beads sound when you shake them around, so I thought that would be cool too, kind of like the sound of a blender. So now I'm just adding some double-sided tape onto the top side of this and releasing the release paper again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a piece of acetate right on top of that shaker pouch, covering it up. So you'll see me do that now, and I'm just putting my acetate on top and really pressing it down so that there are no spaces for it to come off or for anything to come out from it. Now because that acetate covered up some of the adhesive underneath, I'm just replacing that adhesive, and then I can place the entire card front piece down so that pattern paper with the gingham can just go right on top. And that covers up the acetate that was there as well. So it's all hidden behind that pattern paper. I then placed that strip of Desert Storm cardstock right beneath as a little bit of a border to kind of finish it off. After that, I glued on that blender right on top of that shaker opening, so it looks like you're just looking right into the blender and seeing those elements shaking around, which is really fun. Okay, so as I finish off the card here, what I'm doing is I'm just laying out all the images where I kind of want them to be. I sort of just played around until I got the scene the way that I wanted to look, with all the little critters kind of contributing to the smoothie making. And I'm just gluing them all down, sort of with a combination of glue, so some images get stuck right down, and foam squares. Some images get stuck up on foam squares to give them a bit of dimension. So I've done that, and all of the images are stuck down. And then I just was looking at the sentiment, and it had been a little bit smudged. The red ink that I used was really thick, and it just really smudged the sentiment, and I just wasn't happy with it. And I was really debating just leaving it or changing it, and at the end of the day I was so unhappy that I just decided to go for it and change it. So what I did is I glued a piece of white cardstock right on top, so you won't even know that that sentiment was there. And instead of stamping it directly onto it again, I just cut a piece of pink cardstock using a banner die from Lawn Fawn. And I white heat embossed the same sentiment, so we blend well together, right onto that pink banner. And that way I can just stick that banner onto the card, and then you'll never know that that original sentiment that had smudged was there. So I ended up liking this a lot better in the end, and I just glued that onto the card with a little bit of foam to give it, again, a little bit of dimension, matching some of the dimension up top. So the card is almost done. I had a few extra images that couldn't fit into the scene on the front, so I ended up adding them into the inside, which I don't usually do in my cards, but I just thought this was a really fun touch because it looks like the critters are drinking the smoothie that they made on the front of the card. So I thought that was really sweet, so I just added those images to the inside. And as a final touch to the card, I'm just adding a few little gems around the scene and sticking them down with some liquid glue. So that is the final card. It's kind of hard to see how the elements shake in that blender on video, but definitely trust me that in person, those seed beads sound awesome. The fruits don't shake around as much as I thought they would, but I still think it's kind of a fun touch to have them in there. So that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you learned something about shaker cards that you can maybe use at home. And if you do want to see more of my cards, definitely make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you'll see when I post more videos, as well as follow me over on Instagram where I post a whole bunch more cards. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!